Hello and welcome to another episode of Coding Secrets. Today I'm going to be having a look at the SEGA Genesis or Mega Drive game, The Adventures of Batman and Robin. A lot of you think this is the most technologically advanced SEGA Genesis game ever, so let's take a look at how it's done. Quick note, the gameplay footage I've used here is from the channel ALB2 Retrogaming Longplay. I've put a link to that channel in the description, so please consider subscribing. Okay, so at first look, this looks amazing. It's got a 3D feel to it. Looks like there's polygons being rendered to generate this landscape and everything else. But actually, it's a pretty easy trick, and it's one I used in Toy Story on the SEGA Genesis. So I'll hand off to me from the past to explain how this is achieved. It looks like a nicely textured perspective correct polygon. But if we turn off all the tricks, we can see that it's a single image on the background layer, slightly wider than the visible screen. If we load the screen into Photoshop, we can see how the effect was achieved. If we use the skew tool, we can skew the image left and right, and you start to see how the effect was created. All we're really doing here is shifting the horizontal lines back and forth by differing amounts, something 16-bit consoles can do with horizontal interrupts quite easily. I'll use the skew tool to do one fairly smooth right to left sweep. Now if we scroll the screen at the same time, we're getting close. I'll repeat that movement and mask off some of the screen to isolate one part of the floor. The floor texture we use has a repeating pattern that exactly matches the maximum skew effect. So at that point we can swap back to the start and the floor patterns match, allowing us infinite scrolling. Thank you me. So that's how it's done. Now they've done it to a larger extent, they've done the whole building that way in several layers, but effectively they're just horizontally scrolling each individual line of the screen a different amount, and off screen they have a pre-skewed version that when it comes on exactly matches where the screen started, and they can just repeat. Okay, this is a really nice effect coming up, the Billowing Fire. You can see it there. It looks dynamic, looks like it's blowing in the wind, looks super complicated. Great effect, looks really nice. In actuality, it's an animation, probably of about 4 or 5 frames, I'll check in a minute, and then they just, again, horizontally scroll it. At the bottom they scroll it a little bit, and at the top a lot, and we end up with a really nice effect. Okay, let's just count the frames. Here's the first frame to check for repeats, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we're back to 1 again, so 6 frames. So really simple, but a really nice effect. So the next effect is really nice as well, but again, relatively simple to make. So you have these spheres, so it makes it simpler because they're spheres, so they don't need to show rotation in any way. You have to do some maths to figure out exactly how the arm moves, but there's not many spheres, probably about 20 there. And so the rest is down to drawing the spheres, which are drawn as sprites. There looks like there's 4 different sizes of orange sphere and 2 different sizes of black sphere. So they'll store all those frames in memory for the animation of it getting smaller and bigger, probably about 16 frames per sphere. They might even use 2 palettes so that they can use the same frames of animation for the black as for the gold spheres. Or alternatively, they could just store 1 sphere sized from tiny to big, and then they build the arm out of all those different spheres, and then the way it fades into the background and comes back again, it gets darker and lighter as it swings. They could be doing that with updating the palette live every frame, and that would be a simpler way to do it. So you have one animation of a sphere starting small and getting big, you build your arm out of all those different ones, you use 2 different palettes, one for the black, one for the gold, and then as it swings into the background you update the palettes live to give that shadowing effect. And that's it. It's all down to the math to make it move, but this is stuff that was done before. I saw this years earlier than this or something very similar on the Commodore Amiga from a demo from Red Sector, so let's have a quick look at that. You can see it's very similar with the multicolored spheres. Now, I don't think they're scaling the spheres up and down. They're getting away with them at the same size because they're not moving it in and out of the screen too much, but you can see, it's running at a lower frame rate because the Commodore Amiga didn't have the sprite hardware that the SEGA Genesis did, but very similar effect. Okay, this next effect looks great. It's compositionally used really nicely. It's affecting the background and the foreground there, and the airships rotating separately, and it looks extremely advanced. Looks like something you'd see on a Nintendo with their built-in Mode 7 tricks, but this is actually really easy to do on the SEGA Genesis. I did it for the game Pugsy for the first boss fight. And it's due to the fact that you've got these horizontal scrolls like we talked about for the other effects, but you've also got vertical scroll registers to scroll the screen up and down in strips. Now you can only scroll every 16 pixels, which is why you can't see it rotate too far beyond vertical. The background kind of wobbles left and right, but by combining scrolling up and down a little bit every 16 pixels in chunks and scrolling left and right, you know, as much as you want, you get this lovely effect. It's something I found out pretty early on the SEGA Genesis and used in my first Genesis game, Pugsy. And you see the same thing. We're scrolling the ship up and down in strips and left and right by pixels, and you get this lovely rotational effect. But again, it's very, very cheap. Little bit of maths, a few scroll registers. There you go. But I will note that they're doing something clever to get sort of 3 different chunks rotating separately. You've got the background, which is rotating, the sort of bluish stuff in the background, which is great. And then they've got the airship that's rotating separately to the foreground platform. Now on the SEGA Genesis you only have 2 layers, a foreground layer and a background layer. So what they must be doing is doing a horizontal interrupt halfway down the screen to reset all their scroll values, which is why you never see the airship overlap with the platform you're stood on, because they need a little bit of time to reset all the scroll values to be able to scroll all 3 of these pieces independently. Again, really nice effect, really well used, but once you know the trick, extremely quick and easy to process. Okay, again, this is another fantastic looking effect. Looks like 3D geometry and everything else, but again, you can see what's going to be happening here. This is basically the floor from Toy Story again. You can see how it's repeated, or like the buildings in the first secret of this video. But what they're doing to get that sort of movement as you move left and right, or I guess up and down on the screen, is they're probably using, because there's a couple of ways they could do it, they're probably using horizontal interrupts to decide which pixels to show of each of the floor. So imagine you've got the floor there from Toy Story, which moves left and right fine, but to get that up and down squashing and stretching effect, they're just skipping various lines as they move down the screen. You can tell the screen to skip, so if you skip every other line, then the building side would be half as thick. If you doubled every other line, it'd be twice as thick. So by changing the maths on that, you can end up with this wonderful 3D effect. Okay, well, there's plenty more effects in this game to come, so I think I'll have to split this into 2 videos. So I'll see you next time for the rest of these effects on Coding Secrets. Goodbye.